for those who have not been part of this program, this is a very discussion-oriented program. I ask everyone to bring in their own input. But we will start in just a minute. All right, so I'll get started, and people might continue to trickle in, and that's fine. Here, let me share my screen here. All right, so you signed up for Making the Familiar Strange, and today we're going to be talking about the first half of the story of Noah. This is a story that I particularly love because there's just so much depth to it. But let's talk about what we're going to be going through a little bit today. So firstly, I'm going to go over some of the goals of Making the Familiar Strange in the first place. And then we're going to go through a few ground rules about discussing these texts that we hold dear. And then I'll do a quick overview of the story itself to kind of give an idea of the overall story if you didn't have a chance to read it. And then we'll basically go through some various discussion questions together about the story. So without further ado, I'm Jeremy Fricke, and I'm Education Director here at Tri-Faith Initiative. And this Making the Familiar Strange program has two main goals. One is to just study the Abrahamic scriptural stories alongside one another. Jews, Christians, and Muslims especially, but anybody is welcome. We also want to encourage perspective taking by looking at these really familiar stories from new points of view. We often just think that these stories are so obvious, exactly as we were taught about them, or exactly as we just kind of think about them, and revisiting them together can be very beautiful. So just a couple ground rules here. Please be as respectful as possible. I'm sure that there will be a little bit of a disagreement about how to understand different parts of the story. Try your best to challenge your own assumptions. Try to speak from your own point of view rather than, on behalf of some, huge group of people. And for this program, there is no wrong answer. All I want to hear is new perspectives from you all. And I think this really deepens how we understand our own stories. So just also to mention, I use a variety of translations just to kind of get a good idea of how different people have viewed it. I get asked this a lot, and you will receive the slides after the program as well. So I do use the Jewish Publication Society version. I use a few popular Christian translations, and then I also use the 5 books of Moses, which is just the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible by Robert Alter, who is more from a religious studies perspective. All right, so a little bit of an overview of the story, okay? And everyone who creates a timeline of a biblical story is going to break it up a little bit differently, I think. But I'm going to start with, the very beginning of chapter 6 starts with this kind of offset narrative of sorts. It's clearly separate from the previous chronology, but it's kind of put with the Noah story as sort of a preamble, if you will, about these divine beings, the daughters of man, and God recognizing some kind of evil in people. And then Shortly after, throughout the rest of chapter 6 and the beginning of 7, God warns Noah that he's so frustrated with humanity that he's going to send a flood, and then he tells him how to build an ark with quite a bit of detail. And then there is the rain. Okay, the floodgates open, the flood happens, and today we're going to go through these first 3. And next month we'll go through the last 3 sections here. So next time we'll be going over the time after the flood, as well as the sort of blessings and the covenant with Noah, as well as the curse of Canaan by Noah. All right. So, and just another piece of this, I do want to also mention some of the Islamic narrative for Noah. A lot of people are interested in this. So just kind of a brief overview, and then I'll show you a little piece of the story. So a few things that are different. Noah is very explicit about warning humanity of the upcoming flood in the Quran. That's a very central part of the story. It's not really a central part of the story with the Hebrew Bible, but this warning that these rains will come. The part of this narrative also includes this idea that you must repent, you must be good, and if you are good, God will send good rains for people. Not the torrential flooding rains at first, but the good rains, the ways that you grow crops. Also, Noah speaks very little in the Hebrew Bible, but he's almost the entire story in the Quran is actually spoken through Noah. Like there's many quotes of dialogue from Noah in the story. And then another piece that is important, many Muslims, I will not say all, believe that the traditional interpretation of the ark in Islam is basically a smaller boat, fewer animals, a little more localized flood. It's not quite as global as the Hebrew Bible narrative generally is understood. And there's a lot of differences based off of your school of thought, the individual person, and things like that. But that's a fairly common way to see the story from the Islamic perspective. And I'm going to ask people to read a little bit throughout this this program, for the group. I'll start with this one, and I would love for people to volunteer for passages after this. So this is from the Surah Noah from the Quran. It's named after Noah, or Nuh, and it's Surah 71, which is kind of like a chapter if you don't know the Quran very well. Then I invited them publicly. Then I confided with them in secret and asked, "Ask forgiveness of your Lord. Indeed, he is ever a perpetual forgiver. He will send rain from the sky upon you in continuing showers, and give you increase in wealth and children, and provide you gardens and provide for you rivers." So this rain is that good rain. When you ask for forgiveness from God, he will provide you benefit. And I also just want to point out that these first 2 lines, then I invited them publicly, then I confided with them in secret, those are kind of the traditional two ways of a minister. You speak publicly to large audiences, and then you go to people's homes and just have one-on-one conversations with them about this forgiveness that God can offer. Okay, so we're just going to kind of go through some of these discussion questions. Would anyone like to start by reading the passage on the right for me? This is part of the kind of preamble piece of Noah's story. the kind of first chronological section that I discussed earlier.
Okay, this is Deb. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and so afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them.
Yeah, so why is this story important to put here? When we think about how stories are made, we have the beginning and the end, and sometimes we have some extra material. This kind of begins that story of Noah. So why would this be important in the context of Noah? Oh, I see someone's hand rose. Let me see.
What this sounds to me like is going back to the ancient Greeks, with the gods marrying with the humans and having demigods, basically.
Very interesting. Yeah, that does sound a lot like that. Yeah. Would anyone else like to add anything? Or is there anything in particular you notice about this passage? I will say, when you joined, you are muted, and I believe in the bottom left corner of your screen, if you don't know how to unmute, the button is right there.
The other thing that this does, it doesn't say the sons were born, it says the daughters were born, and the sons are sons of God, but then there are daughters that are from some other spot.
Yeah. I don't know that I have any good way of understanding that, but I would love to hear anyone who would like to add to that. So there's like kind of three figures, right? There's the sons of God, the daughters of humans, and then there's humans, right? There's an implied humans that are, so there's the humans who have daughters, and then there's the sons of God. Nephilim come up later in the Bible also quite a few times, and I'm sure we'll get to those a little more later. I will say that, after this piece, which let me double check what's next here. We'll get to that, but the vocabulary around this is a little different than some ways of talking about marriage. This one is a little more forceful, and I think that's important to understand. So they married any of them they chose. Sometimes it's translated as they took wives among them that of those they chose. It's a lot more dominated by one party. And then this kind of leads us into the next question here, which is, what does God think of the human race at the beginning of the story? And this side over here, which I would love for someone to volunteer to read, is kind of the connecting point between that previous story and Noah. Would anyone like to read?
I'll read it.
Okay, thank you.
The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil at that time.
Okay, so what does God see at this point that makes him come to this realization? Why are humans wicked now? If you were with us last time, we talked a little bit about Cain and Abel. And then before that, we have Adam and Eve and Seth, and now we have the sons of God and the daughters of men, and then the coming of Noah. I mean, why are humans considered wicked at this point?
It isn't just our actions, it's our thoughts. Inclination of our thoughts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. The thoughts are where the wickedness resides. It's a very interesting point. I didn't even think about that one. That's a good point, though. I also do want to add, that the sons of God and the daughters of men are before this. I know Rabbi Azriel has talked before about how this is often a teaching against basically marrying divine beings. That's just not a proper relationship. So, and God doesn't like that. But there's a lot of ways to see this. So now we've kind of talked about the piece of why are humans that way, but what exactly does how does God start to see humans as wicked and corrupt? So we have the point of view of humans become wicked, and then we have the point of view of God seeing that, right? We have both pieces at this point. Would anyone like to read the verse on the right?
God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways.
Yeah, so bouncing off, I didn't see who spoke before. Was it
Me.
yeah, that right. So so this one talks about ways. I noticed you were talking about thoughts. I hadn't really thought about that before, but it is interesting that the shift does seem to be along these lines. But I mean, does anyone else have anything to add to that piece? And the other thing I think is important to note here is God saw how corrupt the earth became. There is a separation in some sense, at least a partial separation between the earth and people here. The earth became corrupt because the people on earth were corrupt, right?
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of ways we can understand that. I also wanted to mention here, actually, I think we'll get to it later, actually. So we'll come back to some of those questions a little bit as we go. So would anyone like to read this passage on the right here?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth.
So again, we see another reason for evil. Violence is also related to some extent, and that somehow we are tied up with the earth. But what does God plan to do with the human race? And how does this compare with God's response to Cain and Abel? So if you were with us last month, we talked primarily about how God spends actually a lot of time really grieving the violence there that happened. He talks about the blood calling out from the ground. There's a lot of physicality to how we understand the death of Abel, and he actually says that the ground becomes cursed because of because of Cain. And we'll keep going with that a little bit. But what makes this different, right? I don't know that I have my own answer to this, but what makes this particular situation different? Or, I mean, generations of people came after Cain and Abel.
I wasn't here for the other part, so I don't know, but I mean, basically, everything wasn't destroyed with the story of Cain and Abel. So you had a punishment, but a kind of forgiveness too at the same time. So this doesn't sound like there's any idea of there's punishment, but no salvation, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of there's this with Cain. There's a curse. His primary curse is that he's not really allowed to farm. He's not allowed to work with the earth anymore.
Right.
I wonder if there's some connection there. I haven't really thought through it that much myself on that specific piece, but does something with violence seems to offset the ability to create through gardening and through farming and things like that. There seems to be some kind of problem that happens when violence happens in relation to that.
This is maybe off topic, but it's interesting that in this time of pandemic and everything so upside down, that so many people have turned to gardening and working the earth as a way to find peace, as a way to find purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that was taken away from Cain.
Yeah. To some extent, with some relation to the murder of his brother. It's interesting because, so this is kind of, understood as sort of a related story. They kind of, all the biblical stories stand on their own, but they also are related to each other, right? And we have Adam, who's to some extent cursed to work the ground, although to some extent we can see that as a purpose given. And then Cain is cursed to not work the ground, which we can see as sort of a removal of purpose. And
you have Cain the hunter, I mean, which is the violence of that act.
So why was God only able to pick one righteous person, and why was it Noah? If anyone would like to read the passage on the right, I would appreciate it. I can do this one. And he named him Noah, which is his father, saying, "This one will provide us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands, out of the very soil which the Lord placed under a curse." This is actually a piece that I've noticed a lot of people don't know about, because it sort of happens a little, it happens actually before the sons of God and the daughters of men. But there's a piece that really talks about, why is Noah named what he's named? And he's named for this reason. So what makes this righteous?
Doesn't Noah mean peace?
I think it's related to relief. Yeah, like peace and relief are closely related.
Now, the curse they're talking about here is the one from the Garden of Eden. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's up for discussion. Although the most explicit curse of the ground is in Cain and Abel. In the aftermath of Cain and Abel, God curses the ground, or actually God doesn't curse the ground. the situation curses the ground, basically. Now the ground is cursed because of you, basically, is what he says.
That Adam, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what makes peace, relief from work righteous, right? Like, it's an interesting thing. Like, if you were to judge all of humanity based off of righteousness, it's interesting to choose to some extent this. Now, this may not be the only reason why he's considered righteous, right? This is just one thing that describes Noah before the story. But, I mean, would anyone like to add on, what does this mean for righteousness? Yeah, Gail.
A couple of things queue up for me. One is, it sounds like righteousness would be in not working, the opposite of our culture here that puts so much value on work, 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 busy, busy, busy. And so what came to mind were two things. One was the story of Martha and Mary, where Jesus kind of said, Martha is so busy being busy with busy things, and Mary made the better choice because she sat at the feet of Jesus, which I don't think that saying that work is a bad thing, but I think that what he was saying is taking the time to be still. And so it's kind of be present with God and be present and quiet and meditative, that is a holy thing and not only working.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. That's a good interfaith perspective too, in particular.
Can I interject something that's
Of course
a little off track? Interestingly, we have shared the story of Noah with our Sunday school kids. We wrote it in terms of that time in the ark being an opportunity for meditative time, which made me think of what Gail was speaking of, that Noah had to listen to the rain and try to hear what God was saying for the future and for he and his family, and that we can only do that when we get quiet and get still. So interesting.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. I love how sometimes these things really like circle around and kind of connect us in ways that we don't always expect.
I think the question is an interesting one. Why was God only able to pick one righteous person? I mean, God could have picked as many righteous people as he wanted, but having just finished an event with a big committee, I'm thinking even God might have found it easier to work with one guy and his family. I mean, God is God. He could have chosen as many people as he wanted. He purposefully chose Noah before Noah was even, I'm assuming, before he was even a glimmer in Lamech's eye. He knew where Noah would lead the world.
It's interesting.
And you have the choice too. I mean, maybe he was chosen by God to do this. I mean, it's almost like he's if he translates as Noah's father, because it's not capitalized, then Noah's father is saying this one will provide us relief from our work, and so he is kind of setting him up in that role, maybe because God told him to. I mean, we don't know that from the translation, but it almost is like Noah is born destined to do this from this.
Gail, you had something to add?
I did, and I hope you can hear me. I had to stop before they're putting in a water heater went out, so if there's banging, I'm going to mute myself because they're doing construction. What I was thinking about, why was there one, going back to the previous verses, why did God send the flood at all? And comparing Cain and Abel, one thing I thought was, were they really worse than we are right now on the earth? The other was, was there any other righteous people? Like, was the earth so bad that there was only Noah?
Mhm.
And so that's just something that I was thinking about.
I think that's a fair question. Everyone needs to wrestle with that for themselves, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, you also have to keep in mind, like Noah is considered the righteous person, but his whole family, gets to be on the ark. I don't know exactly what that means, but I think that's interesting to think about. It's not everybody, and it's not just one person. It's somewhere in between, right?
Yeah, but it isn't really his whole family, because one of the things from this story that always bothered me, I can't imagine Noah saying nope to his brother who wouldn't accept it. Nope, you can't come on. You're going to die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that would be tremendously difficult.
Yeah.
That's a good question. It's like, were other people offered to get on the boat and chose not to?
Yeah.
Like I one of those mysterious questions.
So, I mean, the Quran does reply to that a little bit. There is a son who declines to go on the boat, saying that he will go on a mountain instead. He ends up dying in the flood, but that's kind of just an addition from another religion. Well, so here's another piece to that kind of previous question a little bit. Would anyone like to read this quick passage on the right really quick?
Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God.
All right. So this kind of adds to that question of, what makes Noah righteous, right? What makes Noah special to not only be, a prophet, but also the chosen person, the chosen patriarch for the family. Does this help us understand that question at all?
Yeah, I think something about just walking with God and being faithful. It's almost what keys up is just kind of a simplicity. It wasn't like he was a televangelist with millions of followers or something. It was just, he just did what he was supposed to do faithfully.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah.
And I think this is one of it's a Christian overlay in interpretation over the years, but I had often heard this story as God's invitation to mankind, and nobody was paying attention or responding or even nodding to God except for Noah. So this was a relationship issue, so that there was enough connection that there could be relationship. And in Christianity, that's the whole point of it all, is that God wants relationship with us, but we have the choice to respond or not. I don't think that's really in the text. So I think that's an overlay, but I think it's an interesting way to, I will just share something real quick. We, when Tri-Faith was just starting, the director of Opera Omaha is a friend of mine. He used to date my daughter, and he had come across, it was Benjamin Britten's 100th anniversary, and he had written a musical in the 40s or 50s about Noah. And so we were trying to figure out if we could do a joint production of this play. And so we didn't have an imam at that point. But we talked to people at the mosque, and we talked to Aryeh, and we talked to the minister of our church. And the theology in this musical was just so outside what most of us could come to grips with, that, you know, even though we had three distinct theological interpretations of this story in many ways, we couldn't pull it together to present this thing. I don't know why I went off on that thing.
No,
always been sad that we couldn't make that happen, but
it's tough. It's tough. I mean, I think a lot of it is like, and I say this sometimes kind of in jest, kind of not, that you know, the Bible, the being that wrote the Bible was not paid by the word, so the stories are fairly to the point, you know. But there's no doubt, at least in my mind, that whether we're talking about today or ancient people, that people wondered a lot of the same questions. You know, why Noah, right? Why these other things? I think these questions have probably been around a long time, maybe intentionally. I don't know, but it becomes difficult. Yeah, I mean, because people hold the answers to those questions in between the text very dearly.
Yeah,
I had never really thought of it this way, but it, in a way, if you look at it from a Christian standpoint, you have Adam, and in some cases they call Christ the second Adam, who did things right, but you kind of have Noah in between, that's sort of an experimental Christ that's not God, but he's righteous and he's there to show people how to live. And then you go to Jesus, but there's more of a line than I would have thought of before in that sense.
Interesting perspective. Yeah, it's cool.
Jeremy, I don't know if you can see the chat. Jean has to be on mute, but she's been posting. She's posted a couple comments in the chat.
Yeah, let me bring it up. Oh, my apologies. All right. So, if Noah was 400 and his dad was 182 or older, how many people were on the boat?
Is a math
I have no idea. I mean, actually, we're probably going to discuss that a little bit in a second. Because God, actually, here, it might be the next one. No, that's not. We actually have a question coming up here also about kind of about the people on the boat or all those things. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? You know, I mean, there's one question is, do you take the number of people as a literal understanding of the story, even if you aren't literally, you know, understanding the story as like part of a history? Do you understand the way that it was written to be to mean more than it shows, you know, like more than they describe on their face? I think that's a question. You know, there's certain questions that always kind of come up with the Bible. One is, you know, what about the other people, right? That's one question that is always going to come up. Let me see if I can figure out how to get this off here.
But you do have like Gilgamesh. You have the other flood stories. So there would appear to be some sort of either a flood or at least a common remembrance of something like that.
Yeah, and I know that next time we'll actually be talking a little more about, you know, what does it mean to sort of contextualize this story and with the Babylonian myths and other stories from a similar area. You know, like why does the author pick, you know, certain things to focus on in that context? We'll talk about that a little bit more next time for sure. So, please come back to that for that one also. I think this has been discussed a little bit before, maybe, but why? So in the Quran, God basically tells Noah to warn the people. It doesn't really say either way in the Hebrew Bible. Firstly, do you read between the lines? Do you think that it should be understood that he would have warned people? Did God warn people? Or is it simply the responsibility of each of those individuals, the community, to understand what's needed and what's coming? If anyone would like to read this section on the right, I think it helps. Yeah.
God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth.
So just to point out, we have another description of where the evilness comes from, right? Lawlessness is related here to some extent back to other questions that we've talked about. But returning to that other question, why how do you think about it? I don't know that the text tells us really. Does God warn the people with some way? Does Noah, or should we understand that it doesn't really matter that Noah was going to be the one anyway?
I think the God in this story is a very anthropomorphic God.
Okay.
He acts and thinks and speaks like a human does. He has regrets. He can't see the future. He changes his mind. In other parts of our Hebrew Bible, he's the opposite of that. He is more transcendent. He knows what's going to happen. He doesn't talk and speak like a human being. A regular human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's a very, very popular point of view that the Hebrew Bible, to some extent, the distance God is from humanity kind of that moves further away to some extent, or more transcendent as the text goes. That's a fairly popular way to interpret the Hebrew Bible in particular. I think that's a very good point, though. So you would let me see if I understand. So you would say that he made a mistake, or that just didn't really think about that?
And that really is a question. Does God make mistakes?
Yes, according to this Parsha, God makes mistakes. He can't see into the future. He acts like a human being. He thought things would be one way, and he finds out they're not going to be that way. He gets angry. He wants to punish. Very, very human-like God. Yeah. Very anthropomorphic.
It's interesting for sure.
Are you saying that in the Jewish faith you are comfortable with a God that makes mistakes, or is that or not? I think in the Christian perspective it wouldn't, but I think it's a real question because of the story.
In the Jewish faith, we don't agree on anything. So,
I love it.
I cannot speak for the Jewish faith except to say that we disagree on just about everything.
Yeah, I think that's true for most communities. if we're really thinking about it.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
And we think of that as a really good thing.
And that's not necessarily true in all the religions.
Maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on the community and
It
all
should
that.
be.
You know, this sense of distance between humanity and God, certainly a thread within Christian thought is that it's all our fault, right? I mean, it's understood that God, well, of course, God moved away. Like, why did God punish the earth? Well, because we were all sinners. You know, we all deserved it. So in other words, I think a lot of Christians would not put the blame on God. Like, hey, wait a minute, we were righteous. What do you mean? Why wipe us out? I think the stories, and as they go on too, as you read the bigger sweep of the stories in Scripture, it piles on, right? There are so few righteous people is the sense that emerges, and so of course God acts this way, which means too that then a big part of the story is that God is doing some saving here. Like, God is within God's rights to wipe out the world, but decides to try again with Noah. You know, that there's that hopeful piece. And in terms of the numbers, it is Noah and his family. It is it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's always a lineage. It's always about being faithful to God, and so that the one represents all the people. And there's ways in which in Jesus's story, and expanding that thought that all the people means all the people, that too many Christians have lost that sense of that in Christ I'm present. You know, that when God saves the one, resurrects Jesus, that's a resurrection for all. There's that sense of community that's very parallel to these kind of stories, but often not preached. We often don't see it that way.
Interesting. Thank you. So we'll go to maybe a little softer question here. You know, why? So like I said before, you know, not paid by the word, right? There's a lot of, generally, if something is repeated a lot or talked about a lot, I generally assume that it is particularly important. You know, why spend so much time on the exact details of the ark? I mean, the details aren't talked about with like the altar that is built, right? It's very simple. You know, there's not that much specificity to like an altar, but the ark is, you could almost rebuild it. You know, I mean, it's almost every detail, really.
They have rebuilt it in Kentucky.
They have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, why do you think so much time is spent on this?
Well, it could be to prove that it happened historically. I mean,
Okay.
that we have details.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid way to look at it.
From an academic perspective, we were taught that the different parts of the Hebrew Bible were written by different groups of people. Because this has so many details, it would suggest that it was written by the group of people who were concerned with details, possibly the priests.
I see.
I don't know that for sure, but that's what it seems like to me. When you see a lot of detail, it's written by the group, the priestly writers of the Bible, among others.
Yeah, that's fair. Also, would anyone else like to add before I move on?
Does it lend credence to the story? The more details I know, the more logical it seems to me. Even if you can't ascribe logic to it, if I give more detail, then it feels more real.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of physicality to this specific book or the specific story also. You know, there's more more specifics in general with how something feels or how something is built or those kinds of things than there is in the Adam and Eve story, for example. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just worth thinking about. Okay, so this is actually one of my favorite questions. Madigan, who is an intern right now, knows that this is one of my favorite questions. You know, and we'll actually revisit this question later. But why this order? And does it matter? You know, is it just the way to say the people who are going on the boat? Who would like to read both of those passages on the right?
I will. You will enter the ark, you and your sons, and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood.
Now, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, but this actually does change later. But why is it this order, particularly before the flood? And what, you know, does it mean anything, or is it just, you know, I mean, he could have said it in any order. Could have just said, bring you and your closest 6 family members, or your sons and wife, and, you know, any order you could do. Why this order?
If I'm talking from a 21st century perspective, I would say it's the patriarchy rearing its head.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, get on, and oh yeah, you too. Forgetting that without the women, life was going to get a little grim and repopulating. Again, I'm way ahead of myself, but I think reading it from here, it just looks like a cultural thing.
Yeah,
the men lead and the women follow.
I think that's completely fair. I mean, does anyone else have any other ways of looking at that? Because again, we'll revisit this, because now I don't want to go into it this time because I want something for you guys to look forward to next time. But God commands it to actually be you and your wife and your sons wives. So he changes the order of the command after the flood to an age, you know, age first, gender second. This is gender first, or yeah, gender first, age second. I mean, it's something to think about, especially if so next time, and I have a few more questions here, but next time we will be going over the next 2 chapters, which I think are 8 and 9. And this is a little bit of a silly question, but I mean, was the snake from the story of Eden included on the boat? You know, I mean, every kind of clean or unclean animal.
Unclean, yeah. Uh-huh.
Are snakes clean or unclean? I ask that in all sincerity because I don't know.
I don't know. Does anyone who's a little more familiar with kosher know? I do. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, I mean, there's at least 2 snakes probably, right? At least that's kind of, I know it's kind of talking around a little bit, but you know, was the snake or the serpent or whatever saved from the flood?
Well, it says every kind, so, and clean or unclean, so whether whichever it is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we have snakes around today, right? Yeah. You know, would this, and this is an honest question, you know, would ancient people, not that they are the dictator of all things, but would ancient people have thought about, well, you know, there's this other story, and it's the only other animal really talked about with any detail, you know, are they bringing him on the boat, right? That,
Yeah.
I know it's kind of silly, but
and aren't there actually 2 Noah stories in the Bible?
I don't know.
For some reason, I'm thinking that I from remembering something that they're by 2 different, or maybe by 2 different writers.
That might be an argument, yeah. That's a fairly popular interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. You know, everyone disagrees on that. You know, how many writers, human or God, or you know, whoever, right? However many writers is a continuous argument.
I had never heard 7 pairs of clean animals. I had always heard 2 by 2, but I don't know whether it wasn't read that way. So it's interesting.
Yeah. How do you know what's clean at this point? I don't know. We haven't, you know, if we're being very
For us.
Sorry?
Amanda answered in the chat
Oh.
for us. Snakes are not considered clean in kashrut.
Okay. So they would have just had 2, probably. All right.
Yeah, 7. Yeah, that's.
All right. I'm gonna ask. Let's go through this question, and I've kind of got 2 for you to think about when you look through the next chapter. But let's do this one first. And you know, is this the first rain? You know, should this be understood as the first rain? And how does this contribute to how we understand, you know, pre-Noah and post-Noah, especially with our relationship with rain and, you know, farming and things like that. If anyone would like to read the one on the right, it's a bit of a stand-in quote, but here, actually, I'll just read it. So in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, again, a lot of detail. On that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. I mean, what, you know, if this is the first rain, how do we, I mean, how did people think of rain after this?
Wow. Yeah.
And that's something also maybe to think about as you're looking through these other 2 chapters as well.
And the area of Mesopotamia, certainly, except right along the river, would have been very dry.
Yeah, and I didn't really think about it before, but you know, part of the flood is basically underground, right? You know, some springs burst forth, which is not something you usually think about that much with the flood, but that is basically an equal part of the flooding narrative, right? It's the floodgates of heaven, and as well as the springs of the great deep. All right, so actually this goes back to what was raised a little bit earlier. You know, God often is represented with certain human characteristics, you know, and what does this serve, right? So we're actually going to be going through this a little more next time. But, you know, why? So, you know, Noah finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah walks with God, and, you know, walking with God was also mentioned as part of why Noah was righteous. And in the next, or in chapter 8, it's the only time that I know of that God is represented as smelling a pleasing aroma. That God is given the sense of smell in how the narrative is constructed. So, yeah. I mean, if anyone has any first ideas, feel free. And then I have one more question, and then I will let you go. But I'll.
I think we're supposed to, according to Maimonides, when it says that God smelled, Maimonides, of course, would say God doesn't smell. You read it as a metaphor. God has no nose. He has no body. Everything you think you know about God, you don't.
That's fair. That's fair. And we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. And then as you're reading through, I'm not asking for a question or an answer right now, but how would honestly, the destruction of humans and animals and plants, hills and buildings and all these things affect Noah and his family as they leave? When you read through it, think about some of those things. But and then actually one more little one here is, so Noah barely speaks. Adam and Eve speak, Cain speaks. Noah only speaks once, and it's at the very end of the story. In the Quran, he speaks way more. It's almost the entire story is Noah's words. What does this difference mean? And especially as you're reading through the next couple chapters. And does it mean something to you personally, that whether you use the Hebrew Bible or not, does that dialogue mean something beyond the words? The fact that he does not speak until the end, or does it mean that it's just not recorded? So that is what I have for you today, and I want to thank you all for coming, and I will be sending the slides and a recording of this program. If you have any questions, though, feel free to email me. And in the chat, it would be great if you would be able to fill out our survey. It really helps me to learn how to improve this program and other programs, and kind of get a feel for what you like. And like I've said before, please invite your friends. I love all the different perspectives that come in talking about these very familiar stories. And I hope that you enjoy hearing from the range of people who show up to this program. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah.